When Clara Whitcomb pushed open the split-cedar gate at Harlan's remount yard in August of 1886, she expected 4 horses and a hard bargain. What she found was the man she had buried in her heart 12 years earlier. Jude Harlan stood in the round pen, with one hand on the neck of a dun mare, dust on his sleeves, gray at his temples, and Clara's name already caught in his throat, like a prayer he had no right to speak. By sundown, that gate would not just separate 2 ranches, it would separate the life Clara had survived from the life she had spent 12 years telling herself she no longer wanted. The Montana heat had a cruel way of making a person honest. Clara had been riding since before daybreak, following a wagon trail that crossed dry creek beds, climbed through lodgepole shadow, and then dropped into the narrow basin locals called Flint Draw. Her gelding was lathered beneath the saddle. Her dress was stained with dust. Her hands, once soft enough for city gloves, were split at the knuckles from rope, shovel, and winter. She did not care. The woman who had cared about appearances had died in stages. First, when Jude Harlan left St. Joseph with a promise to write. Again, when no letters came. Again, when she married Thomas Whitcomb because he was decent, steady, and offered a roof over her head in a country that ate foolish people alive. And finally, 3 years earlier, when Thomas was dragged half a mile by a frightened team and left her with a ranch that owed more than it earned. Now Clara had 52 head of cattle, a spring that barely held through summer, a leaking barn, and a foreman named Amos Teague, who had warned her, with the blunt kindness of an old mule, that her workhorses would not last another winter. Harlan has remount stock worth buying, Amos had said. Quiet man, keeps books clean, horses don't quit. That was all Clara needed. She had come to buy animals, not make friends. The remount yard appeared at the end of the draw without ceremony. No painted sign, no grand gate. Just split cedar rails, a horseshoe latch blackened by weather, and beyond it, a yard arranged with the careful order of a man who understood that one loose hinge could become a dead horse. This swung down, opened the gate, led her gelding through, and latched it behind her. Montana had taught her many laws, but the first was simple. You close what you open. A barn sat to the left, low and square, roof patched with tin. Corrals stepped down toward a creek that glimmered between cottonwoods. In the nearest round pen, a man was working a dun mare in slow circles, asking for trust without begging for it. His back was to her. Something about the set of his shoulders hit Clara before his face did. The mare tossed her head. The man murmured to her, low and steady, and Clara felt the years tilt beneath her boots. I'm looking for Mr. Harlan, she called. The man stopped as if a bullet had gone past his ear. The mare stopped too. Then he turned. For one breath, Montana vanished. There was only a boarding house stairwell in street. A rainstorm on a July night. A young man promising he would come back once his mother's debts were settled, and Clara believing him because she had been 22 and still thought belief could protect a person. Clara, he said, not Mrs. Whitcomb, not ma'am, Clara. Her hand tightened on the rein until the leather bit her palm. Jude. He had changed. Of course he had changed. 12 years had carved lines around his mouth and put silver in the dark hair beneath his hat. But the eyes were the same, too quiet, too direct, eyes that made a lie feel ashamed of itself. I didn't know you were in Montana, he said. I could say the same. I came north in 79. I came with my husband in 81. The word husband landed between them. Jude looked down once, not long enough to be rude, but long enough to show it had struck. Is he here? He's buried on the ridge above my south pasture. Jude closed his eyes for half a second. I'm sorry. So was I. The answer came sharper than she intended, but Clara did not apologize. Apologies were for people with extra strength. The dun mare pushed her nose against Jude's sleeve. He touched her neck without thinking, gentling the animal while his own face looked anything but gentle. What brings you here? He asked. Horses. The price is fair. 3 if it isn't. That saved them both. Business was a clean fence line. Emotion was brush fire. Jude nodded and opened the gate to the round pen. I've got 3 geldings and a bay mare that can handle broken country. Not fancy, sound. I don't need fancy. No, he said quietly. You never did. She almost left then. Instead, she followed him. The horses were better than Amos had promised. A broad-chested sorrel with patient eyes, a black gelding with clean legs and a scar across one flank, a bay mare who watched everything and trusted nothing, and a steel-gray horse with a torn ear who stood apart from the rest, like a prisoner, deciding whether the world deserved his cooperation. That gray, Clara said, too smart for a careless rider. I asked about the horse, not the warning. A corner of Jude's mouth moved, not quite a smile. He was beaten near Deer Lodge. Took me 9 months to get him under saddle. He'll test you, then he'll work until his heart gives out. Price? Jude named one. Clara stared at him. That's low. That's the price. I don't take pity. I don't sell pity. I sell horses. The old rhythm snapped into place so fast it frightened her, best when both of them were trying not to say the thing underneath. I'll take the sorrel, the black, the bay mare, and the gray, she said. Papers will be ready in 2 days. I'll be back Thursday. Clara. She stopped. He looked at her the way a starving man looks through a window at bread. I wrote. The words cracked something old and sealed inside her. No, you didn't. I wrote 3 times. She laughed once without humor. Then the post must have hated me personally. I sent them to Mrs. Bell's house on Olive Street. That was the address you gave. Clara felt the blood leave her face. Mrs. Bell sold that place after the fever scare. Moved 2 streets over. I waited 6 months. I came back 8 months later. You were gone. A man at the livery said you had married West. I wrote you in October. Jude went still again. To your mother's place outside Leavenworth, Clara said. I used the direction you left. My uncle sold that farm before Christmas. He never told me about a letter. There it was. Not betrayal, not abandonment. A chain of ordinary cruelties. Sold houses, bad timing. People who did not think a young woman's letter mattered. People who had no idea they were holding 2 lives between their careless fingers. Clara hated them for it. People who had no idea they were holding 2 lives between their careless fingers. Clara hated them for it. She hated herself more for how badly she wanted to forgive Jude before he had even asked. I should go, she said. You rode a long way. Take coffee before you start back. No, Clara. That did it. Not the word, the way he said it. Like he remembered exactly how much pride it cost her to accept anything. Coffee, she said. Then I leave. Jude's cabin was as plain as a shovel, iron stove, 2 chairs, pegs for tack, a small shelf of ledgers stacked with the precision of a banker. No photographs, no keepsakes, nothing soft. Poured coffee thick enough to mend a fence post and set the cup before her. For a while, they let the silence do the dangerous work. Thomas was kind, Clara said at last, because the dead deserved honesty. He did not have to be. He married a woman who was already half gone, and never asked where the missing half was buried. Jude stared into his cup. I never married. You should have. I tried once. Couldn't do it. Why? His eyes lifted. Because she wasn't you. The room changed. Clara stood so quickly the chair scraped. Thursday morning. Jude rose too, but did not follow. Thursday. She rode home with 4 horses purchased and 12 years reopened. Only when the flint draw gate was behind her and the hills hid her from view did Clara let one hand cover her mouth. She did not sob. She had not sobbed in years, but she made one sound, small and broken, and the gelding beneath her flicked an ear as if he understood better than any person could. Amos Teague was waiting by the barn when she returned. He was 60 if he was a day, with a beard like wiregrass, and the limp he claimed came from a horse, though Clara suspected a woman had been involved. He looked at her face once and became very busy with a saddle scrap. Them? 4. Harlan treat you fair? Fair enough. Amos paused. You know him. Clara pulled the saddle from her horse. I knew him. That the kind of new that stays buried, or the kind that climbs out? She shot him a look. He raised both hands. All warm stew. I'm not hungry. I didn't ask. By Thursday, Clara had rebuilt enough wall inside herself to return as a customer. It might have worked if Jude had let her. He had the horses brushed, shod, and ready. Their papers were wrapped in oilcloth. He took her payment without counting it, which annoyed her almost as much as the fact that she trusted him to have counted it later. The gray fought the lead the first mile. Clara gave him enough rope to feel powerful, then none at all. Jude watched in silence, approval tucked behind his eyes. You still ride like you're arguing with God, he said. God usually starts it. That made him laugh. Startled her, hearing that laugh again on a Montana trail. It was older now, lower, but it carried the same warmth that had once made a rented room feel like a future. They brought the horses to her ranch by noon. Amos inspected them with the severity of a judge and the tenderness of a mother hen. Good stock, he said. Good hands will keep them that way, Jude replied. Amos looked between them and clearly decided there were conversations he did not want to be paid enough to hear. I'll settle the animals. Mrs. Whitcomb, you might offer the man water unless hospitality died while I wasn't looking. Clara considered firing him. Instead, she walked to the house. Jude drank at her kitchen table, hat in his hands, looking too large for a room that had felt empty for 3 years. Before he left, he stopped at the door. There's a harvest dance in town Saturday. No, you don't know what I was asking. I know that tone. One dance, he said. Not a promise, not a future. Just one dance so I can stop seeing the end of us every time I close my eyes. Clara wanted to refuse. Refusal was safe. Refusal cost nothing. But she had survived enough to know safety could become its own grave. One dance, she said. I get myself there. I'll come for you at 7. I said I can get myself there. I heard you. He left before she could throw something at him. Saturday came like a trial. Clara wore a dark blue dress she had not touched since Thomas's burial dinner. Amos saw her on the porch and wisely kept his mouth shut, which meant he cared more than usual. Jude arrived on a clean black horse, wearing a white shirt and a face that said he was more frightened of Clara than of any animal he had ever broken. The town hall was full by the time they reached it. Lanterns swung from beams. Fiddle music scraped the room alive. Ranch wives looked up. Merchants leaned close to whisper. In a country where news traveled slower than weather and faster than mercy, Clara Whitcomb entering with Jude Harlan was not a small thing. Martha Pruitt, who owned the dry goods store and considered curiosity a civic duty, intercepted them before the first song ended. Mrs. Whitcomb, Mr. Harlan. Well now, isn't this unexpected? Not as unexpected as people minding their business, Clara said. Jude coughed into his hand. Martha blinked, smiled, and retreated to spread the insult more efficiently. Then the music slowed. Jude held out his hand. Clara gave him the one dance she had promised. She had forgotten how easily his hand found her waist, how naturally his steps adjusted to hers. Thomas had danced like a man fulfilling a tax obligation. Jude danced like listening. "You regret marrying him?" Jude asked quietly. "That is an unfair question." "I know." "No. Thomas gave me shelter when I had none. He taught me cattle, weather, winter, debt. He respected me. But..." Clara looked past his shoulder at the lantern light. "Respect can keep a roof over your head. It cannot always warm the room." The dance ended. She stepped away because if she did not, she would lean closer. Outside, the night air had cooled. She walked toward the hitching rail, and Jude followed. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "A chance. We had one. We lost it to mailrooms and frightened relatives. We lost 12 years. I know." His voice was rough. "I know that better than anyone. But I rode past your lower pasture twice in the last 5 years and didn't know it was yours. Then you came through my gate looking for horses, and I saw every cowardly choice I ever made standing in front of me. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you not to make fear the only thing that gets a vote. That was unfair because it was true. What does a chance mean? I come once a week. I help where help is useful. You tell me to leave if you want me gone. I court you like a grown man instead of a boy with more pride than sense. You do not take over my ranch. I wouldn't survive the attempt." That almost made her smile. "Once a week," she said. "No promises. Once a week." He offered his hand like they were closing a cattle sale. Clara took it. They returned to the hall just in time to see Barton Vail walk in. Every room had a way of making space for a rich man. Vail did not need to demand attention. He carried it like a title deed. Tall, polished, and cold-eyed, he owned the largest cattle spread between the river and the mountains, and he had been trying to buy Clara's land since Thomas died. His gaze found her, then Jude. "Mrs. Whitcomb," Vail said, with a smile that had no warmth in it. "I hear you're upgrading your horses." "Replacing stock." "With Mr. Harlan's help, apparently." Jude's posture changed, just slightly. Vail noticed. Men like Vail noticed any sign of resistance, because they considered resistance a personal insult. "I remain interested in your south pasture," Vail said. "That spring line would solve several problems for me. You could take my offer and live comfortably." "My land is not for sale." "Everything is for sale when the winter is long enough." Jude stepped half a pace forward. The lady answered. Vail looked at him as one might inspect a crack in a boot. "And you are?" Someone who heard her. The hall went quiet around them. Clara moved before pride turned into blood. "Good evening, Mr. Vail." Vail tipped his hat, still smiling. "Good evening, Mrs. Whitcomb, Mr. Harlan." On the ride home, Jude said nothing. Clara appreciated that more than she expected. At her porch, Amos waited with a rifle across his knees and a cup of coffee beside him. "Dance go bad?" he asked. "Depends who you ask." "Vail was there?" "Yes." Amos spit into the dirt. "Then it went bad." The Wednesdays began the following week. Jude came with tools, wire, and no speech about how Clara ought to run her ranch. That alone separated him from most men in the territory. They fixed the north fence where elk had torn it down. They dug a new runoff ditch behind the barn. They re-shingled half the roof with boards Jude had bartered for in Deer Lodge and pretended not to have bought on Clara's behalf. When she caught him at it, he said, "It's not charity. I dislike being rained on while repairing someone else's roof." "You're a terrible liar." "Only with you." Amos, watching from the ladder, muttered, "God help us all." In small ways, the ranch changed. Jude's horses strengthened Clara's cattle work. Clara's grazing rotation gave Jude room for foals that would have crowded his draw by spring. Amos stopped glaring at Jude and began handing him tools without insult, which from Amos was practically an adoption paper. But Barton Vail had not built his empire by ignoring threats. The first damage came as an accident, a cut cinch strap, then 2 missing calves, then a spring gate left open during the night, spilling water down a wash until the trough stood dry by morning. Clara knew, so did Jude. Knowing was useless without proof. In September, Vail came to the ranch in a gray coat too clean for honest work. "I dislike seeing neighbors struggle," he said from his saddle. "Then look away." His smile tightened. "You're making poor choices. Harlan's operation has shaky water records. His fence lines overlap old claims. If you tie yourself to him, his trouble becomes yours." Jude had told her his records were clean. Clara believed him. Still, Vail's purpose was not truth. It was rot. Drop a little into the foundation and let fear do the rest. After he left, Amos came from the barn. He's scared. Of what? You two together. The words stayed with Clara all afternoon. That evening, Jude arrived with a ledger under one arm. "He says your records are questionable. Then read them." He put the ledger on her table and stepped back. 3 years of accounts, water filings, purchase notes, horse registrations, debts, income. Every weakness, every strength, every private number set in ink. It was not romantic. It was more intimate than romance. Clara closed the ledger after an hour and looked at him. "You didn't have to show me all this." "Yes," Jude said. "I did." He took a small silver ring from his vest pocket, not polished, not new, a plain band with a worn groove along one edge. "My father gave this to my mother when all they owned was 1 mule and a stove that smoked. I know we said slow. I know I have no right to ask for what I lost. But I am tired of letting lost years keep stealing from the years that remain." Clara's throat closed. "Marry me," he said, "not to answer Vail, not for land. Marry me because we are stronger honest than we ever were apart." She did not say yes. Fear moved quicker than longing. "I need time." Jude's face fell, but he nodded. "Then take it." For 3 days, Clara worked like a woman trying to outrun her own heart. She moved cattle, repaired harness, cleaned a stove that did not need cleaning. Amos watched with unbearable patience. On the 4th morning, he set coffee in front of her and said, "You love him." "I loved him. That was not what I said." She looked out the window toward the south ridge where Thomas was buried. "What if I lose him too?" Then you'll grieve. You're good at it. That is not comfort. No, it's truth. Comfort is this. Amos leaned on the table. Thomas knew he wasn't the first man in your heart. Loved you anyway. He would not want his grave used as a fence. That did it. Clara rode to Flint Draw before breakfast. Jude was in the barn repairing a bridle. He stood when he saw her. "I'm scared," she said. "So am I. I don't want safe anymore, if safe means alone." His eyes changed. "Yes?" he asked. "Yes." He crossed the barn in 3 steps and held her as if he had spent 12 years learning how not to let go too hard. They married on October 9th in a church that smelled of pine soap, wool coats, and cold dust. Clara wore blue again. Jude wore a black suit that clearly belonged to a man less broad in the shoulders. Amos walked her down the aisle and threatened Jude softly enough that only the first 2 rows heard it. Vail did not attend. His men did. Clara saw them near the back, watching, and lifted her chin. Let them carry the news. By noon, the Whitcomb and Harlan brands were filed as a combined operation. Harlan Whitcomb stock and remount. Cattle and horses. Springland and creekland. Clara's grit and Jude's patience. Amos's suspicion converted into bookkeeping. It should have been a beginning. Vail made sure it became a siege. 2 nights after the wedding, Jude found 20 yards of fence cut and 6 mares driven toward Vail's boundary. The next morning, Clara discovered a barrel of grain fouled with lamp oil. A week later, a county surveyor appeared with a complaint claiming their combined water use exceeded legal rights. Vail filed it, the surveyor admitted, miserable and cold in Clara's kitchen. "Of course he did," Clara said. "The complaint was a trap. If they fought it poorly, they would lose months and money. If they ignored it, Vail would turn silence into guilt." Jude wanted to ride to Vail's ranch and handle the matter with fists. Clara put one hand on his chest. "That is the only plan that helps him. He is poisoning our work, so we make him choke on paper." Jude blinked. Clara opened a cedar box Thomas had kept beneath the bed. Inside were old tax receipts, grazing notes, survey copies, water filings, brittle map drawn by the first man to dig the spring ditch 20 years earlier. Thomas had saved everything. Clara had cursed him for it more than once. Now those papers looked like ammunition. Amos sent a wire to his niece Ruth, who worked as a copy clerk at the Territorial Land Office in Helena. Ruth arrived 5 days later, with spectacles, a carpet bag, and a temper sharp enough to shave with. "You've got cleaner records than most judges," she said after a night at the table. "Vail does not." She showed them the pattern. 3 small ranches purchased cheap after sudden water trouble. 2 boundary adjustments that favored Vail by impossible coincidence. A right-of-way proposal that would cut across Clara's south pasture and give Vail control of the only easy wagon route to the river. "He doesn't just want your land," Ruth said. "He wants the route." That was the hidden shape of the fight. The spring was valuable, the pasture was useful, but the route was power. Whoever controlled that road could decide which herds reached market cheapest. Vail had not been courting a widow's acreage. He had been building a gate around the whole valley. The darkest week came in December. A blizzard rolled down from the mountains and sat on them like a living thing. No buried fences. Wind drove needles of ice through every crack in the barn. They lost calves in drifts, and one of Jude's best mares to cold, despite blankets, hot mash, and prayer. On the third night, Clara and Jude stayed in the barn with the animals, taking turns walking the aisle, so sleep would not steal them. "This is what you married," Clara said, teeth chattering. "A widow, debt, and a barn trying to become kindling." Jude pulled his coat around both of them. "Could be worse." "How?" "I could be cold alone." She should have laughed. Instead, she leaned into him and let herself rest for 1 minute. Morning came pale and merciless. They survived, but barely. Morning came pale and merciless. They survived, but barely. The ledger showed it. Feed costs rising, winter losses cutting profit to the bone. Vail chose that moment to visit. His horse wore silver-mounted tack. His gloves were clean. "I heard about the mare," he said. "Hard loss." "Say what you came to say," Clara replied. "I'll buy the combined operation. Enough to settle debts. Enough for you and Harlan to start over, somewhere forgiving." Jude stepped out of the barn behind Clara. Vail's eyes flicked to him. "And if we refuse?" Jude asked. Vail's smile thinned. "Then the territory remains a dangerous place. Fences fail, animals wander, wells go bad, people get tired." This time, Clara did not answer at once, because Ruth was in the hayloft with the window cracked open, because Amos was behind the tackroom door with pencil in hand, because Jude had finally learned not to move first. Clara lifted her voice. "Are you threatening us, Mr. Vail?" "I am advising you to recognize when you are beaten." He rode away believing he had planted fear. He had planted evidence. The statement went to Ruth's superior in Helena, to the county commissioners, and to the editor of the Benton Ledger, a one-armed former miner named Elias Crow, who hated rich men who sent lawyers to do thieves' work. People did not accuse Vail outright. It asked questions. That was worse. Questions made other people remember their own missing water, their own strange fence shifts, their own generous offers arriving right after disaster. By February, the county hearing room was full. Vail came with 2 lawyers, and the composure of a man certain money could buy gravity. Clara came with Jude, Amos, Ruth, and a stack of documents tied in red string. The commissioners expected a water dispute. They got a map of a valley being slowly tightened into one man's fist. Ruth spoke first, precise and merciless. "Mr. follows the 1880 survey only when it benefits him. In 3 places, his later filings shift access toward the wagon route. In 2 cases, affected owners sold to him within 6 months of unexplained water loss." One lawyer objected. The chairman allowed the documents. Then Clara stood. She hated public speaking. She would rather pull a calf in a hailstorm than stand before a room of watching faces. But fear had been voting too often in her life, and she was done giving it extra chairs. "Mr. Vail told me everything was for sale when winter was long enough," she said. "He was wrong. Land is not just dirt to those who work it. Water is not just a line on a filing. A road is not just a road when one man uses it to starve his neighbors into selling." The room was silent. Vail stood. His face had lost its polish. "This is widow's theater," he snapped. "A woman in debt blaming a successful man because she cannot manage what her husband left her." That mistake cost him, not because Clara looked wounded, because she smiled. "My husband left me records," she said. "I learned to manage those." Amos laughed once from the back, loud enough to break the spell. Then others spoke. a sheepman who had lost access to a creek, a freighter charged double to cross a road Vail claimed to maintain but did not, a rancher's daughter whose father had sold after their well went foul. One voice became six became a room. The commissioners delayed Vail's filings, pending territorial review. The right-of-way proposal was tabled. The surveyor was ordered to recheck every boundary touching the wagon route. It was not a clean victory. Clean victories belonged to dime novels. This was better. It was a door opening. Vail tried one last lawsuit, accusing Clara and Jude of defamation. Ruth wrote the response herself and requested discovery on his water records. The lawsuit vanished within a week. Power hates daylight. Spring came late, but it came. Grass returned first, in thin green threads along the low ground. Then foals, then calves, then wagons from smaller ranches arriving at Harlan Whitcomb to buy horses, trade breeding stock, or simply stand in Clara's kitchen and speak openly about things they had been afraid to say for years. Vail did not disappear. Men like him rarely do, but he stopped coming. His empire remained large, but no longer unquestioned. The valley learned the difference between wealth and rule. Clara and Jude learned the difference between surviving beside someone and building with them. They argued, often, about horses, about cattle. The habit of leaving harness on the wrong peg was a moral failing. About Clara's coffee, which Jude claimed could remove rust from a stovepipe. But the arguments no longer felt like danger. They felt like weather, loud, passing, survivable. The ranch grew, not fast. Nothing honest did. They bought a neighboring 80 acres when the owner retired, then another pasture near the creek. Jude's remount horses earned a reputation among freight outfits and cavalry buyers. Clara's cattle stayed hardy through winters that ruined softer herds. Amos kept the books until his fingers stiffened too much for small numbers, then trained a serious young hand to do it properly and insulted him through the entire process. Children came too, 2 girls and a boy, all with Clara's stubborn chin and Jude's watchful eyes. They grew up understanding that gates mattered, records mattered, and a promise was only as strong as the work placed under it. Barton Vail died in 1904, rich and lonely. His funeral filled the church because influence has attendance even when love does not. People spoke of his ambition, his holdings, his sharp mind. Very few spoke of kindness. By then, the Harlan Whitcomb Ranch had become what Vail once feared it would be, a center of gravity. Not the biggest operation in Montana, not the richest, the one people trusted. Years later, in 1918, Clara and Jude sat on the porch as evening moved over the basin. Their eldest granddaughter, Ruthie, had been sent to bring them inside for supper, but she lingered at the steps, 11 years old and full of questions. "Grandmother," she asked, "is it true you only met grandfather because you needed horses?" Clara looked at Jude. He was older now, shoulders bent slightly, beard gone white, one hand stiff from an old break. Smiled. She still saw the man in the round pen, dust on his sleeves, her name in his mouth. "Yes," Clara said. "I bought 4. Were they good horses?" "Very." Jude leaned back. "One bit Amos." "That made him better," Clara said. "Amos needed biting." Ruthie considered this with great seriousness. Papa says you built the ranch because you were both too stubborn to quit. That is mostly true, Jude said. What's the rest? Clara watched the last light catch the old split cedar gate, moved years ago from Flint Draw, and set now at the entrance to their home pasture. Jude had brought it after they sold his first place. She had pretended not to care, pretended to believe her. The rest, Clara said, is knowing when to stop being stubborn alone. Ruthie frowned. That sounds like a lesson. Most true things do. Clara died first, 3 winters later, with snow against the windows and Jude beside her bed. Her last concern was not heaven, not fear, not regret. The east ditch, she whispered. It'll flood if Henry doesn't clear it before thaw. Jude laughed through tears. I'll tell him. And Jude? Yes. I'm glad I opened that gate. He pressed her hand to his mouth. So am I. Jude lived 2 more years, long enough to see the east ditch cleared correctly, to watch his grandchildren ride horses descended from the gray with the torn ear, long enough to sit every morning by the gate Clara had once opened, and understand that some moments do not look large when they arrive. A woman needs horses, a man turns around, a name is spoken, and a whole life changes shape. They buried Jude beside Clara on the ridge where the wind moved constantly through bunch grass. Amos lay there too, under a stone that read, as he had requested, he was usually right. The ranch passed to children, then grandchildren. The brand remained. The gate remained. So did the story. Some told it as romance, a widow riding through the wrong gate and finding the man she had lost. Some told it as a land war, a cattle king beaten by a woman with records, and a husband who finally learned patience. Some told it as frontier legend, a ranch built from 4 horses, 1 spring, and a love too practical to die. All of those versions were true, but none of them were the whole truth. The whole truth was quieter. Clara Whitcomb had spent years believing strength meant needing no one. Jude Harlan had spent years believing regret was a sentence he had to serve alone. Montana proved them both wrong. Strength was not solitude. Love was not a rescue. It was not the dance or the ring or the kiss in the barn, though those things mattered. It was fence wire pulled in freezing wind. Ledgers opened when pride wanted secrecy. A hand at your back in a room full of enemies. Coffee at midnight. Shared grief. Shared work. Shared stubbornness. It was choosing, every day, to make the gate they had opened lead somewhere. Under the wide Montana sky, in a country that punished weakness and tested every promise, Clara and Jude did more than survive, strong enough to outlast the man who tried to take it, the winter that tried to break it, and the 12 lost years that should have ended it. And in the end, the gate was never wrong. It had simply been waiting for both of them to be brave enough to walk through it.